on the history and the current economic environment of the GBA. Today, in the second session, our International Business Advisory Manager, Guillaume Campos, who just moved to our Shenzhen office, will introduce the tax incentives and the government subsidy policies in this area, as well as share his insights on future development trends in this area. So at the end of this presentation, if we have time, we will take a few questions from the audience to answer in the Q&A. So throughout the webinar, if you have any question, please leave it in the question panel. And if we cannot answer your question today, we will try to address them in the follow-up email later. And the recording of the whole webinar will also be sent to your mailbox. Okay, I will now hand it off to Guillaume to begin today's webinar.
Good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending on where you are. Welcome to part 2 of the crash course of doing business in the Greater Bay Area. I'm Guilherme Campos, manager for Desenshiru in South China and Hong Kong. Our objectives today are to go through the parts which we did not have time for during the 4th of March webinar. And these parts are section 3, in which we will be going through the tax benefits and general incentives policies for each of the 11 cities of the GBA, what they can offer, and to already establish the new companies. These advantages can present themselves in a wide range, which go from tax exemptions, housing subsidies, tax vacations, etc. And in section 4, we will talk about the plans for the long-term future, something which we also touched on during the first part of the webinar, but this time we will put it in a more political and practical context, mentioning actual goals set out by the government and what we can expect in the near and long-term future. Well, let's start with the tax incentives and government subsidies to attract investment in the GBA. And we will be now looking at the advantages of investing in the 9 cities within mainland China that are part of the GBA. Okay, in this slide, we can see the 9 cities that compose the mainland China part of the GBA. Last time on the first part of the webinar, we talked about the geographical location of the cities, as well as their GDP structure. We are not going to touch on that again, but just as a reminder, in mainland China, unlike Macau and Hong Kong, the secondary sector or industrial sector is much more developed, with all the cities in the GBA on the mainland China side having practically non-existent primary sector and a very robust secondary and tertiary sector, service sector. Another thing that we discussed briefly is the tax and subsidy policies for each of the cities in the GBA. This is very important because in mainland China, one rule of thumb is that there's always the national policy, then the local policy. There are cities that offer benefits that others don't. And this is why it's always important to check with your local authorities how your company can benefit from the local rules. We'll talk about the policies of Shenzhen, Guangzhou, and Zhuhai soon, but on this slide, I would like to point out that other cities are important as well and are rapidly developing in terms of infrastructure, GDP, and the amount of foreign investors. Just as an example, Foshan gives out subsidies for high-tech companies up to 500,000 CNY, which is around $76,000 USD, and several industries are eligible. Also, subsidies of up to 20 million CNY for manufacturing companies, which is basically 3 million USD. In Foshan, there are also small and micro-sized enterprise employment subsidies in which the government pays social security of the employees on behalf of the company for new graduates. Dongguan, on the other, which is also a very important city and is booming right now, awards subsidies of 1 million CNY, which is roughly 150,000 USD for manufacturing companies, and many other subsidies, as you may see in the slide. In addition to this, there is also a technical equipment transformation incentive of up to 10% of the total investment on equipment transformation, with a maximum of 5 million RMB, which is around 800,000 USD. Financial lease incentives of up to 150,000 USD, and growth incentives for SMEs up to 50,000 RMB or $8,000. In Zhongshan, the city government gives out subsidies to the IT industry, healthcare, and pharmaceutical industry, which is, as I said in the previous part of the webinar, are priority industries for the region, as well as high-end equipment manufacturing industry. And these subsidies go up to 10 million CNY, which is more or less 1.5 million USD. Again, as I said before, this is why it's important to always check with local authorities what advantages you may get and how much money you can save by choosing this or that city. If, for example, you want to create a factory in the GBA, you don't necessarily to place it in Guangzhou or Shenzhen. It can be in Dongguan, which is 40 minutes away from Guangzhou, and where costs are significantly lower. Okay, let's move on to the Guangdong Free Trade Zone and the advantages of investing there. Just some background information. The Guangdong FTZ was formally established by the Chinese State Council in December 2014 and implemented in early 2015. Now, basically, the State Council is responsible for carrying out the principles and policies of the Communist Party, as well as the regulations adopted by it. Due to its strategic position, the Guangdong Free Trade Zone is to become an area for collaboration between Guangdong, Hong Kong, and Macau, and a pilot area for next round of economic reforms which have national impact. Its main development targets are to cultivate a legal, market-oriented and international business environment, further opening up and create a new economic system, and realize deep integration between Guangdong, Hong Kong, and Macau. Just as a summary, in an FTZ, an investor can access preferential tax treatment, customs treatment, and it's a place normally used for experimental policies for opening up foreign investment sectors. For example, e-commerce, before becoming accessible to foreigners on a national level, was only available if you invested in an FTZ. The Guangdong FTZ was established in 2015 and is divided in 3 areas, which we will analyze in a moment. By the way, as of now, as of 2021, there are currently 21 free trade zones in China, each of them with their own specific traits. This is a map. You probably are now seeing a map of all the FTZs in China. I say probably because there's some lagging in the internet, and I'm sorry for that. So the FTZs, the first one was established in Shanghai, in Pudong, in 2013, and the experience went well, with 20 FTZs following the one in Shanghai. The last ones were established in 2020 in Beijing, Hunan province, and Anhui province. This last one is not such a wealthy province and will most likely benefit a lot from the creation of this free trade zone. Curious thing that you should notice here is that the fact that FTZs are mostly located in the east and littoral of China, and there are none in the far west of China, something which creates an imbalance in wealth distribution in this country, and it's something that the government has addressed many times in their speeches and 5-year plans. This is why also recently the government renewed its Go West initiative, which is an initiative to attract investment to China's westernmost provinces. And this was done by publishing in January the catalog for encouraged industries in the western regions, which was implemented in the beginning of March. And I'm sorry, this brief change of gears was just a curious fact that I wanted to share with you about, the division of free trade zones in China. So let's go back to the main matter. Focusing on the Guangdong free trade zone, as I said, it's divided in 3 areas, which you may see in the map. These areas include the Guangzhou Nansha area, the Shenzhen, Shanghai, and Shekou area, and the Zhuhai, Chongqing area. These are all cities that are within 1 hour of distance from each other or less. For example, the Nansha area in Guangzhou will prioritize shipping logistics, financial services, international trade, high-end manufacturing, and similar industries. And its aim is to establish an industrial base with manufacturing services as a focus and a world leading comprehensive service hub. In Shenzhen, in the Qianhai and Shekou area, also one of the main priorities will be finance, and there will be a much more emphasis on finance in here than in Guangzhou. Logistics as well, but not as much as Guangzhou. IT services, which include e-commerce, data analysis, data science, etc. Science and technology services, which include R&D, and other strategic emerging industries, and will be established as an experimental window to the world for China's financial industry, and become a significant base for global service trade and an international hub port. Chongqing in Zhuhai is the least known area of the Guangdong Free Trade Zone, and is also the city with the lowest GDP of these 3 cities. And its priorities will be tourism, leisure, hospitality, healthcare, also financial services, culture, education, and tech. It will be also a base for international commerce services, as well as creation of a new career that promotes appropriate and diversified economies, and also interaction with the Macau economy. As I said before, in an FTZ, you have many advantages, and one of the most notorious is the fact that you can engage in certain business areas that you could not outside of the FTZ. In this slide, you can see a brief comparison of the areas which you can access inside the Guangdong FTZ and that you cannot access outside of it. In this case, you can access investment in fishing activities under Chinese territorial waters, publishing and production of Chinese medicine, and you can partially access investment in performing cultural arts through the creation of a joint venture, which means you would need to have a Chinese partner. This is, as said, this is the current practice in China when it comes to opening to foreign investment. First, the government does a pilot experimental scheme in an FTZ, and if it goes well, it becomes accessible everywhere, nationwide. As of recent years, the Chinese government, in addition to foreign investment catalog, the government publishes a negative list, in which it mentions all the industries which foreigners cannot access or can access conditionally. In the Shenzhen part of the FTZ, which, as I mentioned, is the Qianhai and Shekou area, the regulations dictate that only companies from the sectors you see on the slide can incorporate a company there. And these sectors are financial industries, logistics, IT, technology, professional services, which are law firms, accounting firms, and also finally public services such as green environment protection, etc. And this is being done because these industries have a strategic importance for Shenzhen and for the GBA as a whole, because the government, is pushing, through speeches, through laws, regulation for the development of these specific industries. And the good thing about this area of the FTZ is that you don't need a physical office for your company. Similarly to what happens in Hong Kong, you can have a virtual office which reduces your costs tremendously. Also, it used to be that last year, if I'm not mistaken, it used to be that companies in the Shanghai area needed to have a registered capital of 5 million RMB. But at the end of last year, the government removed this requirement, which is very convenient if you are an SME or a startup. Okay, let's take a look at tax incentives and government subsidies in the Shanghai Free Trade Zone. One of the major advantages of setting up in this area is that preferential corporate income tax rate of 15% for certain industries, as opposed to the normal 25% rate, which is practiced in China. Obviously, there are some conditions for being granted this preferential rate. And the condition is that the total income earned by the company must come from some preferential industries in an amount of at least 70%. This means that if a company works in tech, which is a preferential industry, and also works in another field that is not preferential, then the total income granted from tech must be at least 70% of the company's annual total income. Also, it is important to mention that even though it says that this policy will be in place until December 31st, 2021, it will most likely be renewed, because in the past, this policy also had a deadline of December 2020, and the government renewed it. So it's likely they will continue to do it. They just set a deadline to it to sort of, I don't know, cover their backs. This is very common practice in China. Now let's take a look at the preferential industries. About the preferential industries that are subject to the corporate income tax preferential rate, these are modern logistics, which include freight forwarders and any logistics related company or logistics service company. Also, another preferential industry is science and technology service industries, which have a very wide range of application. Any R&D, research and development in the tech scientific sector would be included, which includes medical devices, biomedical, new materials such as batteries production, etc. Other preferential industries include the IT industry, which includes e-commerce, data mining and analyzing, data science, cloud computing, and anything that goes under the IT umbrella, as you may see in the slide. Finally, the last preferential industry is the cultural creative industry, which honestly, I don't know why it's chosen as a preferential industry, given that it was never one of the engines of growth in the region. But I guess it must be due to political options taken by the government in trying to enhance the cultural value of Shenzhen and the GBA. In this preferential industry, it's included design services for products and physical spaces, such as interior design, urban and landscape planning and design, etc. Also, within this last preferential industries included the development of animation and online games and media in general, such as programs, films, etc. Apart from the design and landscaping part, this last sector is normally a sector that is not that attractive to foreign investors, and also has a lot of barriers to it. Now, let's talk about a little bit about the incentives for individuals, which are also important. Just a moment. The Shenzhen part of the free trade zone also grants subsidies to individuals in order to attract people from Macau and Hong Kong and from abroad. But in Macau and Hong Kong, the reasons are much more obvious because the EIT rates, the individual income tax rates there, are much lower, as we saw in the last part of the webinar. This subsidy is equal to the proportion of the individual income tax that exceeds 15% of the taxable income paid in Shenzhen per year. Basically, just to give you a more concrete explanation, the formula is subsidy amount is equal to the amount of IIT paid in Shenzhen minus taxable income multiplied by 15%. And these subsidies will be themselves exempt from individual income tax. Let's do a practical example. For example, let's take Mr. A, who works in Shenzhen and works and lives in Shenzhen, and is therefore a Chinese tax resident. With an annual salary of 700,000 CNY per year, and annual deductions of 60,000 CNY for food, rent, laundry, children education, etc. His taxable income every year is 640,000 CNY. And in a normal situation, his individual income tax would be $139,000.80. However, with the IIT subsidy and by applying the formula I mentioned, you get a 15% of the taxable income. 15% of 640,000 CNY is 96,000, and you subtract the taxable income of 139,000 by 96,000, and the result is 43,080. Then you subtract D, which is the individual income tax, by E, the IT subsidy, and you get the final result, which is 96,000 CNY. So basically, at the end, an annual salary of 1,700,000, which is more than 100,000 US dollars, gets taxed at 96,000 CNY, which is less than $15,000. This is a very good deal, and it makes it very attractive for Hong Kong, Macau, and even foreign residents. And now we should analyze other subsidies in the Shenzhen, Xinhai, Shekou area of the free trade zone. In addition to the tax incentives and the preferential industries, there are many other subsidies an investor could get, which are subsidies for R&D, which go up to 10 million RMB or $1.5 million USD for international R&D teams setting up entities in emerging industries, for setting up R&D facilities for creation of new products and technologies in internet, biomedicine, emerging or advanced manufacturing industries. There are also subsidies for startups, which can reach 1 million or 150,000 USD, obviously provided certain conditions are met. Also, companies which are set up in this area of the free trade zone for more than 6 months get a one-off fund equal to 50,000 CNY, which is 8,000 US dollars. Also, companies that establish their headquarters in this area may be granted subsidies up to 20 million RMB or 3 million US dollars. Also, in the case of companies that have their headquarters and are also in the financial sector, they may be granted subsidies of up to 10 million RMB or 1 million USD, and 50% of support of costs for the relocation costs. In the case of establishment of logistics companies, these days may even be up to amount of 10 million RMB or 1 million USD. In the case of professional service companies, which as we have seen, are law firms, consulting firms, accounting firms, the subsidies may be up to 2 million or 300,000 US dollars. Also, again, for individuals, the subsidies in place may reach 6 million RMB, which is almost $1 million. And the free trade zone also provides grant support for foreigners who qualify as talented individuals, as well as scholarships and grants for companies hiring or providing internship opportunities and contract positions for foreigners, always with a priority given to Hong Kong and Macau residents. Okay, now let's look at subsidies in the FTZ area, which is in Guangzhou or the Nansha area. As you may see, Nansha and Guangzhou has managed subsidies for companies engaging in R&D activities, and these subsidies range from 100,000 CNY to 20 million. So basically $15,000 to $3 million. These subsidies are applicable not only to companies, but also to universities and research institutes that cooperate with companies or foreign institutions. Also, on an individual level, Guangzhou has gained a lot of notoriety by implementing attractive measures to attract talents from Hong Kong and Macau, such as, again, subsidizing their office rents, private house rents, and establishing incubators and accelerators, as I mentioned last time. Also, the workforce in the scientific and tech sector is growing exponentially, and a lot of jobs are being posted constantly. In addition to the subsidies, the Nansha area enjoys advantages that Hangqin and Qinghai do not have, which include having one of the two deepwater ports in the mainland, a railroad sea transportation network, and the vastest land mass of the three regions of the free trade zone. And besides that, the free trade zone, the whole district of Nansha is slightly larger than Singapore, and has a registered population of under 1 million, roughly around 800,000, compared with Singapore's 5 million. Also, Nansha is on its way to become a world-leading artificial intelligence industry. They recently established an AI zone, which is fostering the development of this type of industry, and they are forming a group of dynamic and sustainable AI businesses and building a national leading artificial intelligence city model. Currently, as of 2021, there are more than 130 artificial intelligence startups and giants, giant companies that recently set up in the Nansha International AI Innovation Zone that I just mentioned. And basically, to sum up, the main characteristics that define this area of the free trade zone are financial innovation, custom clearance convenience, closer cooperation with Guangdong, Hong Kong and Macau, cross-border e-commerce, and easing up of enterprise registration, as well as always having attractive talent policies to attract people from other areas of the GPA, from Hong Kong and Macau, and from abroad. We should look now at the advantages of investing in the Anqing area in Zhuhai. These basically are a little bit less than its counterparts and include the possibility of having bonded warehouses where the goods exported from abroad are tax exempt until they're actually sold to final customers. This is very important as measures for import and export companies and e-commerce, because they can delay the payment of taxes when they import goods to this country, and only actually paying the tax when the goods are sold. Another advantage is that transaction between companies in the area are tax exempt, so no VAT payment whatsoever. Also, clearance procedures for crossing borders for HK and Macau residents are eased with a 24-hour open passages, and residents from these regions are eligible for the individual income subsidy I mentioned in the Shenzhen Free Trade Zone. And this subsidy is also applicable to other talents from abroad. And also, to finalize, a preferential tax rate of 15% corporate income tax rate is applicable to some companies incorporated in Anqing, which is subject to an annual review by the local municipal government. Now, let's move to the advantages of investing in Hong Kong from the tax and subsidy point of view. When it comes to Hong Kong, similarly to the mainland, there is also a subsidy for R&D to support research projects undertaken by R&D centers or public institutes in partnership with private companies. Some of the key features of the subsidies is that the funding is up to 50% of any given project, subject to government approval and ownership of IP rights are acquired during research. In number 2, as you may see, in what concern tax deductions, the law allows for 300% of the first $2 million in R&D expenditures and 200% for the remaining amount. There are also cash rebate schemes of up to 40% of a company expenditures in R&D projects, funded by the Innovation and Technology Funds and funded by companies in partnership with designated public research institutes. Finally, for number 4, the Enterprise Support Scheme provides subsidies of up to 10 million Hong Kong dollars with the objective of encouraging the private sector to invest in R&D. Moving on to the section in the top right section of the slide, the SME Export Marketing Fund. This is a way to basically encourage SMEs to expand their markets outside Hong Kong by providing financial assistance and to engage, enhance their participation in export promotion activities. And the companies eligible for this must be Hong Kong registered companies, naturally, and it must meet the government's definition of an SME, among other requirements which are published in government websites. The maximum amount of funding for each successful application is 50% of the total approved expenditure incurred by the applicant enterprise, or 100,000 Hong Kong dollars, whichever is the less. There is no limit on the number of applications by an enterprise. However, each enterprise may receive a maximum amount of funding, which is like capped at 800,000 Hong Kong dollars. On the number 1 of the right side of the slide, the dedicated fund on branding, upgrading, and domestic sales basically provides funding support for Hong Kong companies to undertake projects to develop their brands and restructure their business operations, and engage in further operations in China and Southeast Asia. And each company may obtain a funding with a cap of 4 million Hong Kong dollars. Also, another initiative that is quite important is the number 2, the General Support Program, or GSP, which aims to support non-R&D projects that contribute to the upgrading and development of Hong Kong industries, as well as the fostering of innovation in the area. And these subsidies are also well north of 2 million Hong Kong dollars. There are also other incentives, as you may see, number 3, which are the SME loan and guarantee or export credit insurance, which basically consists of a loan guarantee scheme in which the government acts as a guarantor for an individual SME to help them secure loans from lending institutions such as banks or other institutions. Finally, the SME financing guarantee scheme consists of the government providing guarantee coverage of 50% up to 70% of the credit facilities for eligible enterprises. So in this slide, you will see a summary of what I just said for R&D and the SME overseas expansion, as well as other funding schemes for hiring, business development, and fundraising. I'm not going into detail for these last ones because I wanted to focus on the ones that, in my opinion, are the most important. And also, I wanted to talk about something that is not present in this list. In the case of the fintech industry, which is one of the main industries in Hong Kong, or maybe the main one, the government, for this industry, the government is giving out 150,000 Hong Kong dollars to companies that have new concepts to solve problems in financial institutions. Obviously, in this case, there is a cap on the subsidy, which is a maximum of 10 million Hong Kong dollars. You know, as you probably know, if you read news about Hong Kong, fintech is always the driving sector in Hong Kong's economy. And despite the current situation, there are many new jobs being posted in the sector. Fintech, of course, includes activities such as, you know, personal finance, blockchain, insurance, which is like an area that is growing a lot in Hong Kong since the beginning of the pandemic, digital banking, which I mentioned in the previous part of the webinar, and payment solutions, which is also, you know, TransferWise and other Revolut and other apps that facilitate payments. Now let's talk about Macau to end our run on the subsidies and advantageous policies for investment in the GBA. In the case of Macau, unlike the other sections of the GBA, there aren't that many investment subsidies. However, there are some fiscal incentives for companies in the processing industry and for projects that contribute to local industry, which means it would be industry and not services. These companies will basically get exemption of industrial tax, 50 exemption of profits tax, which is already a very low rate, but still, and 50% exemption from property transfer duties, and sometimes full exemption. Also, when it comes to financial incentives, there are also subsidized loans for companies with a cap of 400,000 MOP, which is equal to 50,000 US dollars. And these are subsidized by the government. In this respect, I should also point out that loans like these are not very hard to get if you meet the requirements mentioned in the slide. Also, when it comes to SME subsidy schemes, to promote SMEs and enhance their competitiveness, there are requirements to get these subsidies, which is basically being registered with the Financial Services Bureau, which is, you know, the body in Macau, the government body that controls the tax activity of companies and the payment of taxes. Also, another requirement is employing less than 100 employees, and that these employees are working in Macau. Some of these subsidies for SMEs are credit schemes with a maximum with loans guaranteed by the government in 70% with a ceiling of 5 million Macau patacas or in USD 600,000 USD. The repayment of these loans should be done in the maximum of 5 years, which is quite good. Also, there are subsidies for SMEs that engage in special projects, and these funds should be used for specific business projects, which should be submitted to the government and are also subsidized in 100% by the government, also with a ceiling of 1 million Macau pataca, which is roughly $130,000. Also, finally, to finalize the subsidies on SMEs, there are 8 schemes in a maximum amount of 600,000 Macau pataca or 80,000 USD, and which should be repaid in 80 years. Well, the Macau part was quite brief, so we can now move on to the final section, section 4, in which we will be talking about what to expect for the long-term future. In the long-term future of the Greater Bay Area, it appears to be full of promise. However, there are many challenges ahead, as you can see in here, and which can endanger its success. On the top of the list, I would put personally the tensions between US and China, which, regardless of who is in the White House, will continue to be a hot topic, as this is really about trade and money, not about eccentric personalities. Another big problem is that, and also being addressed by the government, is that the GBA comprises 3 different jurisdictions with 3 different legal systems, tax systems, and local governments. One is China, another is Hong Kong, which has British roots, and another is Macau, which has Portuguese roots. Of course, they ultimately must obey the basic law and the central government, but still, it's a problem. And also, with different jurisdictions come different cultures and languages, which is in its own way affect doing business with the other jurisdictions. And then there is the problem if the current tensions between Hong Kong and China, which despite having calmed down slightly because of the pandemic, will still be a problem in the foreseeable future. On a more positive note, another important stepping stone for the future of the GBA was President Xi's visit in October of last year, where he asked for further reformation of the region in an attempt to increase innovation and consequently the GDP growth, and to, in his words, create another miracle in the next 5 years. The word miracle is used here because, given the growth of the region itself, which was a miracle, according to President Xi, it would take any other nation in the world more than 100 years to do so. So basically, just as a summary, the main takeaways of this visit were that in the last, in the next 5 years, the GBA will almost duplicate its GDP, or intends to do so, promote IPO registration systems, expand fundraising channels for both local and foreign companies, which is also a big problem for companies that want to finance themselves here. Promote the digital yuan or the digital RMB, which is something that is currently being talked about a lot in the news, and allow foreign financial institutions to set up securities and fund management companies and obtain payment licenses in Shenzhen, and an overall further open up to foreign investment and reform. On a final note on this slide, to give you an idea of what is ahead, President Xi stated that Shenzhen was an important engine for the growth of the GBA and that more special economic zones will be built in China in the future based on the Shenzhen and on the GBA model, which is good for foreign investment. Also important to refer on this slide is what the projections for GDP are for 2035 versus what they are now. For the GDP as a whole, for the GBA as a whole, it's projected that in 2035 the GDP will be almost 4 trillion USD in comparison to what it is today, which is roughly 1.7 trillion USD. And that is basically more than double of the current GDP, which is really impressive. And if a doubling of GDP is not impressive enough, when you see the contrast with other cities such as New York, which is expected to grow a lot, but not nearly as much as the Greater Bay Area, or Tokyo, which, as you can see, will barely grow, all of this becomes even more impressive. And then you can look at the Chinese cities in general in this graphic, which will all grow in an outstanding proportions, and especially the individual cities of the GBA at the bottom of the chart, which will all more than double their individual GDP. Just take a look at Shenzhen and Guangzhou. As a follow-up to the previous slide, it's important to compare the current GDP of each of the greatest Bay Areas of the world, as well as the long-term forecasts for growth of population, which will have an influence in the overall wealth of the regions. GBA, the Chinese GBA is currently the 11th largest economic entity in the world. Currently, on par with South Korea, Canada and Italy. It is the largest Bay Area in the world by land and population, and is 4 times the size of San Francisco Bay Area. It represents 0.6% of China's landmass and 5% of the population of China, and it is 12% of the GDP. So this is all impressive and very revealing figures. Within the next decade, the plans and the forecasts for growth of the population in the GBA will be much higher than the Tokyo, Osaka, or San Francisco Bay Areas, which, as we have seen in the previous slide, will have a huge impact on the GDP. And also, to finish this slide, given that this region focuses so much on imports, export, and logistics, in the right side of the slide, you will see a comparison of the world's top container ports. And even though Shanghai, Singapore, and Ningbo understandably play the lead, the ones after that are the 3 of the most important cities in the GBA, which are Hong Kong, Guangzhou, and Shenzhen. This is the current transportation network of the GBA. From one city and at present times, from one city to the other, you always need roughly 1 hour or even less of commuting. And as you can imagine, this is a very important factor when working and doing business in the region. Also, the government announced the plan in 2020 to start a transportation program to cover all cities with an additional 5,700 kilometers of railway by 2035. Also, the Bay Area will launch 13 intercity railway projects, as well as 5 integrated transportation hub projects. And this will have very good consequences, which will to reduce the commutes between major cities and from major cities to less important cities. And as mentioned during the last part of the seminar, the five main airports of the GBA will also undergo expansion in the next years. For example, take me as an example. I live in Shenzhen and I'm now in our Guangzhou office. And it took me roughly 1 hour to arrive here from Shenzhen by high-speed train, something impossible a few years ago. Also to finalize on this slide, in terms of subway or MTR networks, the western extension section of the Guangzhou Metro Line 7 will connect with Foshan. Guangzhou Metro Line 4 will connect with Dongguan. And Guangzhou Metro Line 18 will extend to Zhongshan, Zhuhai, and Xingyuan, which are all very important cities where foreign investors are present. Just as a recap and on an end note, the reasons why the GBA will be even more attractive in the long term and the goals that the national and local governments set out for this region are: number one, focus on high-tech industry and technological exchange between cities, prioritizing biomedical, digital, IT, e-commerce, and the manufacturing of new materials. Number two is making sure that this technological innovation is done in a green way. Shenzhen, for example, has almost 100% of its vehicles all electrical. It's literally impossible to get a cab in Shenzhen that is not electrical, and I think in Guangzhou this reality is also very prevalent. Number three is further easing of the movement of goods, capital, and people, not only from a transportation point of view, but also from a crossing border point of view. Something that was quite hard during this pandemic, and that is now finally becoming less restrictive, with China allowing entry into its territory for vaccinated people, and Hong Kong not imposing quarantine to people from the Guangdong province as long as they are Hong Kong residents. On the fourth place, another big long-term goal is the expansion of the private sector. And obviously this includes especially the foreign private sector, which can only be done through the continuous opening up of the region to foreign investments. On a final note, and also to end the webinar, I would like to mention that in the beginning of this month, the American Chamber of Commerce in China published a white paper. This white paper had a theme which was the quality of business environment in China, and business environment especially related to the foreign community. And this white paper had, I think, roughly 600 pages, so like not a light read, but the responses were overwhelmingly positive. Sorry, with people are still very confident in investing and renewing their investments in China, and especially in the Guangdong area. And when surveyed, the companies that were surveyed said that one of the main reasons for investing in this area in particular is the incentives and the opening up of the GBA, which is very revealing and will be a very important factor in the coming years. So I think we have some questions from our attendees. So I will now pass the microphone to Shanshan so that she can mention some of these.
Hi, Guy. Thank you for this presentation. And I will check up if we got some questions from the audience. And in the meantime, you could just put your contact information on the screen, so the audience could just write to you if they have other questions to follow up. And I think we still have time to answer two questions. Mm, let's take a look at this one. I am looking for a Chinese partner in the South China to do a joint venture. What is the best way to find one? Do you have any suggestions on that?
Thanks. I think this is something that we get a lot, and the answer is a little bit complicated. Obviously, there are very various ways to go about it, and there are companies, including ours, which provide a service which is called matchmaking, which basically sets up foreign investors with local investors. Because companies, when they arrive in China, and even when they are present in China for many years, sometimes they don't know where other similar companies are located. The the cities are so big, and sometimes there's not enough exchange of information. So people hire companies to do this on their behalf, to search for similar companies. Also, really, chambers of commerce and consulates, but more chambers of commerce do this. They have like a section in their website where they say matchmaking, and basically in this section, companies post ads saying, I'm a company X and I'm looking for a partner that is looking to invest in robotics, biomedical, etc. And both Chinese and foreigners can benefit from this. So this is the way to go about it. Another way is hiring a specialized company to do it for you. Like anything, there's a cheap and expensive way to go about it.
Okay, thanks for the answer. And let's take another one. This one said, I want to learn more about subsidies, tax policies, etc. in mainland China. Where could I find those information? Who should I contact for that?
Uh, Again, this is also uh, several ways to go about it, but the most direct way is to really, especially if you have, if you speak Chinese, or you have staff that is Chinese, is to contact the authorities directly. We should contact the MRA, or the Market Regulation Authority, which was previously known as the AIC, or the Administration of Industry and Commerce, which is basically um, a reshuffling of several government bodies that manage and regulate investment in China, and are the first entity to know about any subsidies, policies, general benefits that companies might be eligible for. This means both Chinese and foreign, of course. So this would be one way. Another way is, again, if you're not that familiar with China and you don't have Chinese speaking abilities or staff, is to hire a foreign company to do, or a company present in the territory to do this for you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you again for giving the presentation, Gila, and thanks everyone for joining us today. Sorry, this is all the time we had for today. If we don't answer your question, we will follow up with the email to address them, and we will be sending out the recording of today's webinar as well. Please keep an eye on your mailbox. And if you have other questions, you could also feel free to reach out to us. Our team is always very happy to schedule a call or have a quick consultation. And thanks again for joining us, and hope to see you again in another of our events in the future. Bye-bye.